Hopefully this is a meeting of more than one. It was funny when the committee first started, everyone got here at like 10:45. And then like slowly over time, it got later and later. And then one time I got here at like 10:55, like really late and no, kind of like this, and no one was here. And like, I'm here on the wrong day. But then people like clockwork usually start rolling in.
Hi. I'm not my sandwich open. And that's, do you want to have your?
I am muted. Are you connected or muted?
Oh, sorry, that's probably me. So.
You have 6, Cassie?
Yeah, we have 6 now.
She just doesn't have her video on.
Can you guys hear us online?
We can.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Sorry for the delayed start. We were waiting for a quorum, and with Serena joining, we have a quorum now, so we can begin.
Okay. Okay. Welcome everybody to our September 2024 Environment and Climate Committee meeting. It took us a second, or are we live streaming and recording?
Yeah.
We're all good. Okay, great. It took us a second to get started. We were just waiting for quorum, but we have it now with our folks online. So we'll go ahead and get started with our roll call. Andrew.
Present.
Covey, here. Kelly.
Here.
Laura Tabor and Lauren Frazier both told me they weren't going to be able to make it. Mark.
Here.
Neil here. Rory.
Here.
Serena.
Here.
And Smita also said she wasn't going to be able to make it. And then both of our ex officios are also not present at the moment. Okay, so we're going to approve minutes first and then do public comment. So the minutes, if you saw in the email, were reviewing because we didn't have a meeting and we had all of our CCAP update workshop meetings. So the this is an opportunity if folks had looked at those minutes and want to correct anything on the record from those meetings. There's an opportunity to share any proposed changes or corrections. I'll leave that request open. If anybody online, I'm watching for hands online. So if you need anything, feel free to raise your hand. So sorry, this was for the June 13th ECC meeting, the July 11th Waste and Materials, August 1st Energy and Buildings, August 5th Energy Supply, August 8th Transportation, CCAP meetings, and the August 14th Electrification Input meeting. Okay, not seeing any changes, and those minutes are good moving forward. So we'll move on to public comment.
Oh, I don't have my public comment slide, shoot. We have no attendees, so, okay. We do have one sign up for public comment. We have no one attending virtually, so we don't have any virtual comments. So we have Trevor. You have 3 minutes to make your comment.
Okay.
And there's a little timer right next to you. You can go ahead.
Great. I'm going to read from a script because I didn't manage to get it all printed out. So, good evening, esteemed members of the Environmental and Climate Committee. My name is Trevor Johnson. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I currently serve on the Cascades East Transit Regional Advisory Committee for Redmond, and I'm right now working on building out our network throughout the community and advancing our public transport for our members of the citizens of Redmond. And I'm here to advocate for a future goal, sustainable transport in our region, specifically the promotion of a light rail system between Bend and Redmond. With our rapidly growing community and increasing highway congestion, the need for an efficient, eco-friendly transit option has never been more urgent. By investing in a sustainable commuter rail, we can significantly reduce our region's carbon footprint while improving accessibility and connectivity between our cities. To fund this initiative, I propose we explore a combination of strategies, including implementing a regional carbon tax, attracting private investments, and seeking federal funding. Together, these resources can help turn the vision into a reality, benefiting both the environment and our local economy. The other thing, because we have such an abundance of sunshine here throughout the year, I think we can also move from going from the grid to it being ran by solar, by putting solar panels up and down the tracks. Even if we can't build our own tracks, we can work with BNSF Rail to use some of their rail tracks to build a commuting system between our two cities. And then also the vision of Amtrak, with the federal government right now investing millions and billions of dollars into commuter rail across the country. I think it would be really important if we could somehow work with Amtrak, BNSF Rail, and get an extension up here to Bend. So that's all I have for you guys today, but I may be back in the future.
Great.
So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
so much for coming and commenting.
Absolutely.
All right. So today's meeting, big picture wise, is a short list on the agenda and a long amount of content, like is pretty normal in these meetings. But you can see the agenda up there. Staff updates, and then really today's primarily focused on Community Climate Action Plan, CCAP update stuff. And there should be opportunity for some more discussion around all of this. So we'll try to keep on schedule.
Is stuff the official term for it?
Stuff is definitely a technical term, yes.
Okay, I can share some staff updates. We have a few. The first one is related to committee recruitment, really. So as you guys know, Alex Sarusi had to vacate she had to resign from her position because she's relocating out of the area. So that creates a vacancy for her position. We also, though, because we're coming up close to the end of the year, we're at the point where from the original people that started when the committee was formed are up with their 4-year terms and at the end of this year. So we have 5 committee members whose terms are up. And so we will be recruiting starting in October to fill any vacancies that we have from people who are resigning at the end of their terms, plus Alex's seat, which will be like a 2-year seat. So any committee member who has a current sitting committee member has an opportunity to be reappointed for another 4-year term. We need to know, for those of you that are in that position, if you want to be reappointed by September 20th, so that we know when we are recruiting, we know how many positions we're, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. We know how many positions we need to fill. The recruitment's open, so the application will be open from October 1st until October 31st. So could we technically have like a little, like, just because I'm not telling them until now, is it okay?
20th is like me
That's
having
adopted.
wiggle room. No.
Oh, okay. We need to know by the 20th. Okay. Anyway, so I know that's a couple of you who are here today are in that position. So I'll be reaching out to each of you individually via email. I'll try to do that later today or tomorrow. And I'll be asking you if you want to be reappointed or if you would like to resign at the end of your term. So think about it. You've got 8 days.
Can you tell us who those 5 are? Do you know?
Yeah,
Jog my.
yeah, Ashley has the list. Can you actually have it too? Is it quick for you?
Yeah.
That's 33 now.
Yeah, because I guess we've got 6 of us on here that are from the beginning right now on this call, right?
Yeah, exactly. But there were some people from the beginning who started 2-year terms. And so so some of the people that started at the beginning are not terming out right now because they
Right.
have 2 more years in their current term. Can you read the
Yes,
list?
Covey, Kelly, Mark, Rory, and Serena.
So those 5, and then again, for Alex's position, we'll definitely be recruiting.
And that
So-
one will be a 2-year.
It'll be completing
Oh,
her
that'll-
2-year
Oh,
term.
sorry, you're
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Wait, who were the 5 again? Sorry.
What?
Who were the 5 again?
Rory, Covey, Mark, Serena, and Kelly, right?
What about Neil?
I was on a
Neil was on the
2-year.
2-year term.
The whole
Okay,
structure,
got it.
just
Sorry,
as a
I missed
reminder,
that.
as I'm thinking of this through,
Yeah.
too, the whole structure with it getting started was that every 2 years, you would have half of the people come up for reappointment or.
So,
the
yeah, so with a
opportunity to
new
resign.
committee, we do a one-time 2-year term.
So then half of
so
the
some
people are on
take the
opposite
2-year
schedules.
term.
That makes sense.
So that was why, like, we had some people rotate off after their 2 years, like Peter and Bill.
Yep.
So, yeah, and then Neil and Kersey was one of the 2-year terms and she stayed on, and then, anyway.
Got it.
So that's,
Thank
yeah,
you.
the situation now. Okay, let me go back to my updates. So again, I'll reach out to you all by email. But expecting to have, probably at least a couple new committee members in January 1st. And then another,
Is-
yeah,
Could I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Is there a preference? Because I know we've talked about this at one point about like, it's nice to have new, fresh voices, but also it's nice to have folks who have a good understanding of everything. So is there a preference from the committee or the city side, in terms of like, for folks who are approaching their terms to like, is there a preference for like half of the folks to not, like, do we want all the folks who've been here for 4 years to continue to serve for another 4? Or is there a preference one way or the other?
I don't think we have a preference. I think we expect, knowing that it's a 4-year term and a pretty big commitment, I think we expect some people to choose to resign. And for that, especially for that reason, we always, welcome and support people that want to stay on, because the continuity is really helpful too. So both are helpful, and it typically just works out just perfectly well, however it does. So, yeah.
And I'll also remind folks that this is also a time frame to do some not actual recruiting, but we as committee members will be able to answer more questions than others. So if
Yeah.
you know people in the community or have heard of people or met people, or you think there's voices that you'd like to see represented on the committee, both committee members and general public should be able to do that outreach
Yeah.
and try to help support that process, because it is kind of a, as you know, well, yeah, we want to make it as visible as possible.
And,
And-
we got an email to the full committee from someone who was interested, so I did respond to that individual. So, whenever someone contacts me and wanting to know how to get involved, I always, let them know when the next committee appointments are coming up and that sort of thing. So, interviews will be
Oh,
held.
Mark has a hand up.
Oh, yeah, Mark.
Yeah, just on that point, because I've had a few similar interactions, should we just tell them to go directly to the application process and watch for that? Or do you have a list going where people would be notified when things come up? Or even, I don't know if, I'm assuming, Cassie, you're not trying to talk to everyone who's potentially interested ahead of time.
Well,
how
we don't have like a specific listserv for the ECC vacancies. If someone is on the city's general newsletter, I'm pretty sure it gets shared in the general
There'll be a
newsletter.
press release. at the
There will be
beginning
a
of
press
October.
release, so they can, they should just sign up for like city alerts would be the best place, because when we do recruitments, it's typically for, it's many committees at once. So we do a press release with like all of the vacancies. I'm happy to talk to anyone. If someone is interested and they want to talk with me, I'm happy to do that. It's never been like too many people to handle. So definitely feel free to send them my way. I often offer to them that I can connect them with the chair as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely feel free to do that.
Okay.
I'll add just quickly to answer your question. I think what council is looking for, based on what the code says, is less about continuity interfaces, but more a representation of a diversity of subject matters. And so when council is thinking about who they're going to appoint, that's probably what they'll be looking at because of how the code is written.
Okay. Any other questions on committee recruitment?
Not a question. Also, we will have a not a substitute, we recruit for one additional, don't we?
An alternate.
The
An alternate, or are we not doing alternates?
We're gonna, I need to think about
Okay.
that. And yeah, we've kind of been talking internally, trying to get a little bit of consistency among committees, and then just figure out, like, as you've seen, even with ours, like alternates have been handled sort of differently over
Yeah.
the years, and we're still sort of trying to figure out like what's the best approach that
To
makes
be
sense for us
determined.
to stick to. Yeah.
Sounds good.
TBD.
Did we not currently have an alternate? I can't remember what happened with the last.
We did,
process.
we had an alternate that was selected in the last recruitment, but we we don't have a standard of like how long they stay the alternate. And so like it's been long enough now that we typically don't keep the alternates if like a certain amount of time has passed.
Okay.
Um,
I guess the question I'm asking is with Alex's resignation, do we have that alternate to step in for the remainder or no?
since we're close enough to the general recruitment, it just makes the most sense to just do a recruitment and include them in that. If we were like way off, like we weren't gonna do a recruitment for a while,
Yeah.
we would probably talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, another update is that, we have, the council, had expressed interest in adopting a resolution committing to electrifying city facilities. It kind of came out of our general electrification policy discussions. We brought to them a draft resolution for committing to electrification in city facilities in August in a work session. They indicated that they were really interested in moving forward and adopting that resolution, and they were really have positive feedback about it. So we are scheduled to bring a resolution to council to vote on at the October 2nd meeting. So that's an exciting step related to our electrification and our climate work in general. And then also on the electrification topic, I just wanted to take a moment in the staff updates to just remind us the process for the broader electrification policy options, because it really connects to the ECC agendas. So we're in the stage for that electrification policy options analysis, where our consultant is putting together a report of basically a draft list of different policy options that we can consider. They're finalizing that right now, and we are going to share that report with the ECC prior to your October meeting. And then in the October and November ECC meetings are when we need the ECC to really digest that report and then actually develop a recommendation that we'll bring to council for which policies you'd like to see the council move forward with. So that's going to be a really big focus for us over the next 2 months. So at the October meeting, that report will be released. And so if there are community members that are like interested in kind of knowing like what the status of everything is, that the report that we release for the ECC meeting will be, where you can direct people to. And then we'll have parametrics come to the October meeting and go through that report with you. And then we'll facilitate a discussion from there. We also, after that draft report is released, that's when we'll do stakeholder interviews with utilities and some other stakeholder groups to get their feedback on some of those different draft policy options. And then we can bring the information we get from the stakeholder interviews, we'll bring to the ECC in the November meeting so that you guys can also take that into account as you're finalizing your recommendation. And the goal is to bring an ECC recommendation to the council at the second meeting in November. It'll be at a work session because it's not necessarily like a voting matter, but probably a pretty meaty work session to really talk substantively through the policies and what the ECC is interested in pursuing. I think it's possible, I think likely that we may want to add a working group meeting, a public working group meeting in between the October and November meeting, so that we can try to finalize a recommendation by the November meeting, but we'll talk about that at the next meeting. But just something for any of you who are interested in really being involved in that, that we might want to schedule an additional meeting in October.
Kathy, will the stakeholder interviews be open to the public?
The stakeholder interviews are not open to the public because one, they're not subject to public meeting laws, and two, it's really just meant to be factual information sharing, like with the utilities, like learning more about the challenges and barriers. And it's just when we do stakeholder interviews for lots of different topics, and they're not typically something, it doesn't feel like there's a reason to have it open to the public, and it may detract from the information that we need to get from there. And they're not subject to the public meetings law.
Okay.
I just had a question about the city electrification resolution. Has that been shared with us, or is that?
It was shared with the council, so the public documents are on the website. I may not have remembered to send a draft directly to you all.
Yeah.
But it is out there.
Okay. would that be helpful for especially the energy working group to like review as well? And I don't know, provide feedback or,
We're pretty close to finalizing it, so it's not necessary from our perspective. If it's something that you guys read and you know, would like to, we can talk about adding something like that. But the council discussed it in a public meeting. You know, we had public commenters there. So it's pretty well formed at this point. And, you know, if if committee wanted to provide feedback into it, we could do that, but it would be an additional public meeting and postpone the adoption of it, which is of course an option, but the council didn't indicate they felt like that was needed.
yeah. And I think there had been some folks who expressed interest in being part of that special working group on that, so I'm curious if they had a chance to review it or wanted to provide anything specific in terms of like just saying it just looks good or.
Yeah, we didn't talk about forming a group specifically for that. So that the desire for that resolution came out of the council work session in March. They asked the staff to bring a draft resolution to them. So we went ahead and did that. Yeah.
I think I meant the group was for the electrification policy option.
Yeah.
Side of things.
Yep. And that's where I do anticipate that we'll have a public meeting with a working group focused on that to further digest the report that we get in October.
Because I guess from not being involved in this, I guess I see that resolution as one piece of the city's overall electrification plan or actions that the city's taking.
It is. Yep. That's right. Okay. Any other questions about that stuff? Okay. Do we want to move on to the first agenda item then?
Yes.
Okay. So before we talk, the main goal today is to talk substantively through the actual CCAP actions and strategies that we developed in our working group meetings. First, I wanted to just give an overview, a reminder of the CCAP process and the next steps so that you guys have some context for like what we're doing today and how it fits into the rest of the process. So what we're trying to do today is have everyone review all of the actions that the working groups came up with. And we're just trying to get to general agreement from the committee that these are the CCAP actions and strategies that we want to move forward with. The next step is that we will take the list that we kind of soft finalize today. And I say soft finalize because we will have opportunities to still refine some of the details, some of the really specific action levels. But what we need to do as a next step is do our greenhouse gas emission evaluation of the strategies and also bring these strategies, get feedback from the public on them too through a community survey. So what we're trying to get to today is just agreement that this is the body of actions and strategies that we want to move forward with. And then, so the next step will be, once we have that list sort of finalized today, we'll be sending them to the consultant who will do our GHG evaluation. We're also going to finalize and launch our community survey. So the evaluation will take place roughly from mid-September until November. And then the community survey, we just need to develop it once we have the action completed. We anticipate launching that in October, mid-October, and also having that ready by November. So the goal is that at the November meeting, we'll hold time to report back to the committee on the results of the greenhouse gas analysis and the community survey. Another next step that needs to happen is just getting both staff and council feedback on the strategies. Exactly what that looks like is a little bit TBD and it's a little bit iterative because it's sort of different depending on what strategies we're talking about. That's something that I'm starting now by talking with staff, in some cases external partners, like for the waste and materials actions, going and talking with the county and the haulers and some of those external partners. I don't know exactly when and how we're going to bring the strategies to the council for feedback, but I anticipate it will probably be like a council stewardship subcommittee meeting. That's something I still need to work through with leadership on when we do that, but I'm anticipating having a step this fall to get feedback from the council. So I have that listed here as just sort of September through November, but it may be more like September through December, or just depending on how it evolves. The next step in our big process is that we once we have the strategies finalized, is doing work planning and resource planning for those. So those are discussions that I think will take place starting in November or December, once we have all the information about the GHG evaluation and the community survey, and we've gotten the feedback from the staff and the council, and then we kind of know, okay, this is more or less the finalized list, then we'll start doing some of the work planning and resource planning. Anticipate, actually writing up the report in the early new year and then bringing it to council whenever we're done with that for adoption. So really all of like the figuring out of stuff should be happening between now and the end of the year. And then hopefully starting in January, moving on, which is also good timing since we are going to have people terming out at the end of the year. And then hopefully in the new year, it's mainly just kind of writing it all up and going through the formal process motions. And then I do have a sort of more visual version for at least the first 5 steps for anyone who's more visual. Does anyone have, I have more information about the community survey too, but does anyone have any questions about just the overall process?
I do. I guess the question I have is, so once we get the greenhouse gas inventory and evaluation and the community survey and all the other feedback from staff and council, are we using that time to really finalize everything and kind of vote on like a finalized list and version as a committee? So
Yeah.
probably like November, December. it
Exactly.
sounds like, okay.
Yeah.
And there will be a chance to, I'm guessing all that feedback in the survey will be, if there are any ideas that come out of it for new actions or changes to existing actions, we'll have a chance to discuss and incorporate like what that looks like as a committee as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I didn't like call that out as a specific step just because it's hard to know, like, and oftentimes the types of things we're changing hopefully are more of like this, the detail level. If there was like an entire new strategy that came out of that we didn't even do the greenhouse gas modeling for, we would maybe have to go back, add some scope and add in something like that. So something like that could adjust our overall timeline. It's just a little bit hard to say until we know what that is. But yeah, we will definitely have an opportunity once we get the feedback, of course, being able to take that feedback into account and adjusting as necessary. And hopefully if it is, say it's just like one new strategy, that wouldn't stop us from moving ahead with the work, the rest of it, the work planning and the resource planning. But there just may be some additional steps in there to bring those new ones in.
Any comments or questions online? I was curious, what does work mean? So like work and resource planning?
That was a desire from when we were first talking about planning the CCAP, the committee being really interested in making sure that we have like a work plan and we say, okay, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z. We're gonna have discussion about funding, like, and resourcing. So I have it kind of grouped right now because it's a little bit ambiguous in a general sense.
Yeah.
But it's holding time to make sure it's like we have the actions. Now we're going to talk about how are we going to get them done? What kind of resources do we need? And how are we going to get those resources?
Okay.
And I don't know exactly what that will look like yet because we're not going to be able to figure out every detail of that.
Right.
But it'll be working with you guys to, have enough of a roadmap that you guys, feel good about.
Work, yeah, that's helpful. Work planning and resource planning. I was just a little lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And then what's your plan on how to incorporate, like what the process and how you're planning on incorporating staff and council feedback? Because I think this is just a we'll say an iterative process, but it's goal setting and like, placing those things in reality are 2 things that I think it's important to be intentional about, of a strong desire to do this. And then in some places that might, with staff feedback, be like, that's great. That's incorporated already into this plan. So, if we change this language, then it's like totally in alignment. But then in other areas, there might be barriers. And so I'm just trying to figure out if you have a plan for how you plan on kind of bringing that up with committee prioritization and council feedback, like how all those things work together and what the flow between that feedback is.
Yeah, I don't have a perfect answer for that right
Yeah.
now. My plan is to take the actions to different departments, to community partners and to senior leadership who have, more discretion over resource planning and
Mhm.
that sort of thing, and a council. And then gather what feedback I can from that. So to whatever extent those discussions lead to changes in the strategies that you guys have said,
Mhm.
or other like significant information, like we could maybe do that one, but we would need a new funding source for it, that sort of stuff. I'm hoping in December, that's what I can, like I wrote that as, I'm hoping for our December meeting, that's the type of information I can come back to you and like report out on,
Okay,
and any implications of that. And I think it ties to the work planning, because the work planning, a lot of the work planning really is dependent on that feedback from the other departments, especially the ones that have to take place in partnership with other departments. It's in these discussions where I'm getting feedback on the strategies, it'll be sort of discussions about both. It'll be like, what do you think about the strategy? How doable is this? But then how can we actually do it? What are the barriers? What are the timelines and those sorts of things? And so that's why it's a little bit hard for me to say exactly what that will look like now until I have those conversations. But I'm hoping that by December, especially if we've gotten through the electrification work and we've gotten, all of the results of the analyses, that in December, that's what our discussion can be. So it should look like me coming back to you and saying, these are the discussions I've had about these things. And there may be like a staff prioritization recommendation that comes back to you based on that. We may have questions for you about what are your priorities, so that if that gets communicated up through council goals, staff can give feedback on what needs to happen to make those things happen, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's just a little bit squishy of a concept right now.
I think that's helpful, knowing that both of those areas will bring their feedback back before we move forward. So both staff and council will at least have we'll have the opportunity to review some summary of that, and then see where we go from there. So I think that's helpful. And then I guess I'm also curious, I know some of this goal was in this timeline, which there's a lot. So in all of the things that are happening right now, but some of the goal was trying to get things lined up for having enough information available to be helpful and strategic with council goals. And so do you think that wherever we're at I know council goals kind of happen all spring, but there's like kind of key points in there. Do you think we'll have enough forward, or have we gotten feedback from council of what would be really helpful in that process, like in that December process, to come from us, or what kind of the key points are of where we'll need to communicate to them, whatever is helpful for goal setting?
It's not a conversation I've had specifically about this council goals, but generally speaking, I think, especially if we want to talk about like resourcing and actually doing things, it would be ideal to have sort of priorities from the committee for like specific actions and programs that you want to see happen in the next biennium, and have those sort of packaged with what we think the associated resource needs are to contribute to their council goal setting process. I think as specific as it can be, the better. In the past, we've kept it more broad, like implement some strategies from the CCAP. I think we feel like there would be a benefit in it being more like implement these 5 things from the CCAP so that we can actually resource them appropriately.
Okay.
Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, and then that I'm assuming the earlier the better for what that is, but I'm wondering if there's any milestones in the whole council goal setting and budgeting resourcing process that happens in the spring, of where if we're not going to be at an end product, if there's an interim piece that we can shoot for as like a milestone of having some, top level or the things that we think have the biggest impact on city resourcing or something like that in that big block of work and resource planning, just to make sure that we're helpful and in alignment with the council's timeline.
Well, I think as long as we have the actions sort of finalized by December, and then hopefully a conversation about which actions are the priorities for you guys for the biennium. I think that would be the deadline to try to hit. And like I said before, if in the early new year is mainly just gonna be writing it up, like the content should be figured out by then.
Okay.
And then that's what we would want to bring forward to council goals. The council goal workshop is scheduled tentatively for early February.
Okay.
So by then, having like a list of like, but we should, based on the trajectory we're on, we should have the completed list of actions, hopefully good feedback from departments about like major barriers and resource needs. And then, take priorities from you guys about what you'd like to see in the biennium. But I think it would be helpful if we go talk to the council in the fall in the stewardship subcommittee, like also wanting feedback from them about what their priorities are so that we can, because I know that's something that the committee has asked in the past when you guys have tried to do your own priorities. It's like, well, does the council have priorities? Like, where can we see where we have good alignment there? So I'm hoping it can be a combination of priorities from the council, from input from staff about like what feels really doable versus what feels less doable or what there's bigger challenges for. And then have you guys like take that information to prioritize and then submit that to council goals.
Okay, that's helpful.
So it sounds like for agenda planning, we should plan on December and January's meetings to have our own prioritization project.
Yeah.
Informed by
Mhm.
council's stewardship committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's gonna be sort of hard if we have like depends on how much turnover we have, I guess, in January, but January
Right.
can be sort of hard to do things like that. So we're just trying to get everything done by the end of the year. Yeah.
Related question to the work and resource planning conversation, and sorry if I missed this, but what's the timeline for the new staff person that the city's
The
adding?
new
to help do
staff
this work?
person is starting on October 15th. She requested a delayed start because she had an international trip planned. So she'll be starting October 15th, so she'll just barely miss your October meeting, but you'll meet her, if not sooner, at the November meeting, and then she'll be on board for all of this stuff. And then in terms of work planning, we'll be able to plan with like her position being an additional resource, which will, is obviously gonna be dramatically different from previous bienniums.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had one more question too, but I don't know if anyone wants this before I do. And I've asked this before at the last meeting and also I think the waste and materials meeting, and I was reviewing the minutes. But I think I brought up one of the suggestions was moving from sector-based emissions to consumption-based emissions in terms of the fuel, the goals at least in terms of the plan. And I see that you had mentioned that you suggested including the bigger picture discussions about CCAP changes following the new action workshops. I'm just wondering if that's the discussion of it, not whether we do decide to do that, but the discussion of that, is that somewhere on this timeline, or do you have a good idea of when that would be? I'm not saying we have to discuss it right now.
I did not include that specifically in this agenda. So if we want to add something like that, it would probably be added in December.
Okay.
So remind me, I just sort of forgot about that as its own thing, but I know that we've talked about that.
Yeah, and I think I was also just reviewing our current CCAP, and there's like a section that says climate plan update in 3 to 5 years, and we've talked about some of these bullets, but there's 3 specific bullets. One is focus on adaptation strategies and tie into the community's resiliency plans, which we've talked about kind of delaying because that's a pretty big project. There's the greater focus on consumption, which talks about that switch in consumption-based emissions. And then there's focus on water conservation and water energy nexus. But just because all 3 of those are specifically called out, I would like to at least have a chance to discuss it and then know where, like if we're delaying it for another 3 years, at least like have a clearer picture of what we're doing with those suggestions from the current plan.
Okay.
But I guess the other question is, if we have that in December, because that has such a big impact with emissions inventory, that's like the one concern I have is because switching that would make sense to do before the emissions inventory is done.
It would, and we did recall that we had several conversations
Yes.
early in the process about the scope of the update. So
Yes.
some of these questions and then the resiliency one, which the water one is directly tied to the resiliency because that's sort of how you bring water. That's one of the most direct ways where you bring water. That's one of the big water connections is through doing more of a resiliency lens. We didn't bring up changing the goals specifically, but when we talked about, is this a big update or a small update? That's when I would have expected to hear that sort of feedback, like, hey, no, we really want to change fundamentally the goals we're looking at. When we picked a small update, you know, the implication is we're not fundamentally changing the goals. So I'm comfortable adding a later meeting about it to sort of recap at the end, because I think you make that decision at the beginning, but then at the end, you're sort of looking at, okay, what are the implications of those decisions that we made? So I think we can revisit those discussions. It would absolutely, like if we wanted to change how we measure the goals, it would really, that would be a pretty dramatic
Yeah.
change, and it would change our whole process for sure from there, which we'd have to talk about if there's, you know, desire to do that. But so it's not that we didn't, it's not that we just aren't thinking about it until the end. We had a lot of intentional conversations about that.
No, that makes sense. I think you're right. We did agree as a committee, we're gonna keep the scope limited, so
Yeah.
I'm in favor of that. I think the only piece I'll mention is, I'm happy to have that discussion in December, and then maybe we punt it off to two or 3 years later to having that complete like revised plan or a fully new plan. But I do wanna just see if it's still possible as part of the missions inventory to have them do some of that work to at least have the data available, because that's one of the things the plan mentions is, and I know we've talked about this multiple times, it's really difficult to do it, but at least put it on their radar to like include that where possible.
Yeah, I don't think changing our goals to include the consumption-based goals, I don't believe it would change the GHG evaluation that we're doing at all. Like
Okay.
we do, because we have consumption in our
Yeah.
thing, in our strategies, and they are calculating emissions reductions from them.
Okay.
I don't have the details about, you know, we'll have to ask them when they come back and present the results to us, like how that fits with the goals. I just don't know the technical answer to that off the top of my head. But just based off of the way because we have consumption-based strategies, it shouldn't really change the way they calculate it. It just changes how those calculations are measured against the goals, I guess.
Did we capture this in the last CCAP strategies with were the co-benefit section, like that was a tool that we used for some of the items for like, you know, this is an identified co-benefit outside of what just the GHG number was. Like, is there an opportunity if it's not included or just like kind of in that mucky in between, if we could still like, would that be something that we could just use as a proxy of identifying that there's a co-benefit of the upstream?
Like add a co-benefit for waste for like consumption
Yeah,
emissions reduction. I can talk to them about that
Okay.
and see if that's something that would be easy enough to include in our scope. If that, Covey, if you feel like that would sort of help.
Yeah, I'm not sure completely, because I think you're right. What you mentioned is that they are the charts and the data still includes the emissions reduction potential from those actions that are consumption based. But I still want to verify that. I'm confused
Yeah.
because I know the plan says the goals don't include that, and they mainly take a scope one approach, but they do include scope 3 calculations and data.
Yeah.
So it seems like the data is there.
Yeah,
It's just the plan is not structured around that data.
yeah, exactly.
Is my understanding. So, but yeah, there's a way to highlight some of those actions if it's not being prioritized for some reason. Maybe that is a good in-between approach. And then this also came up in the waste materials discussion, but I think you were going to check and see if they're able to do it more at the action level instead of a strategy level, especially when the actions are very different. And I know you weren't sure it was possible. There might be some limitations, but I think we had a little bit of discussion and was like, well, if they're coming up with the full number, they should also have the individual numbers to some degree.
Yeah, so they have feedback for us on like how to group the different actions and strategies based on like what they can scale and what like groups together into one strategy or not.
Okay.
So today we're going through the strategies grouped in the way we proposed them through the workshops. But those groupings may change. So they may pull some of them out and be like, oh, this one we scale really differently. And this is like a discrete thing we can calculate and not part of this bigger thing. And then those will be pulled out and then certain things grouped. So it's likely that the final way that things are grouped will be a little bit different than how you see them. And that's where that stuff would get determined.
Okay, that's helpful.
And they're waiting to see our list. I sent them the drafts of the list, but that's why we need to sort of finalize this list today so that we can send it to them and be like, this is what we're working with.
All right, let's get into it.
Yeah.
All my questions.
Okay, I do have one more quick slide on the community survey, just so you guys sort of know what that's about. So we have a goal launch date of October 14th, and we're planning on using the Jotform platform, and the goal is to have like an opening page, then 4 pages, one for each sector. It will have a little bit of background info on it. So the opening page, it's like, what is the CCAP? This is what it is. And then for each sector, it's like energy supply. So a little bit of like the high level data we have, energy, these are the ways that energy supply affects you in your daily life. And then the questions that we're planning on asking is showing them the list of strategies, not all the actions because it's just too much, but asking them at the strategy level, what are their priorities? Like, what are they the most excited about and think that the city should prioritize? Asking a question about barriers for either adopting those strategies or sort of engaging with that topic. And then also an open-ended question in each for just like, what other thoughts do you have on this sector? And that's where people can share, like, here's an idea you missed. We're trying to, with surveys, you have to try to keep them sort of, you don't want them to be too long. So we tried to have questions that we can get good information on, but then like a general one where people can give us, if they want to give us a new action, they can. If they want to just share a huge issue they have with one of the actions or the whole effort, they can share those there. So that's sort of the plan. And then we'll plan on distributing through city channels, like typically a press release, social media, and our newsletter. I'll share the link with you all and with our community partners so that it can be shared through other networks as well. Often when we do press releases, that will lead to media interviews on the topic too. So hopefully we would have some media interviews to share, to let people know that it's open. So that's the plan for the community survey. We'll have one more meeting before then, where it will be about to go live, but I just wanted to give you guys a heads up, and that's the plan for that. Any questions about that?
Will they have a chance to suggest new actions as well as part of that? It sounds like that's that open.
That would be in
question.
the open-ended one, yeah. Okay, well, let's get to the bulk of our meeting then, and I'm going to actually, the way I think this will work, so like I said, we want to go through all of the actions. And we don't want to wordsmith, similar to the workshops. We don't have time, of course, to really wordsmith each of them. What we're really looking for is making sure that you guys feel like this action covers all the actions that you want to include. We're not missing any major areas, and that all of the ones that are in here are actions that you think are important enough for us to include to allocate city resources to try to get implemented in the community. So I think the best way will be sort of similar to the workshops where we go through them, and then I'll take your feedback. I'll put it up on the screen so we're all following along. I'll take your feedback and write notes as feedback, and then after the meeting, go through and sort of synthesize and try to update the strategies with that feedback. And as long as we have sort of clear direction together, then I think we'll have enough to send that list to the consultant, even if we didn't like come back and finalize it with you all. So that's how I was thinking about doing it. And then we have, so for each, I can either go through, we have the 4 sectors, each one has like 4 to 6 strategies. And I was thinking about just reading all of the strategies and actions together for each sector so that you guys like hear the whole picture. And then asking you guys to just share the feedback that you want on the ones that you want. I'm worried if we go like one by one, we won't get through all of them. So I can either go read all the strategies and actions for energy supply, or we can try to do it strategy by strategy if you guys think that will be a lot more manageable. But I thought there might be a value to like seeing the whole sector to get the whole picture in case there's something you think might fit in a strategy, but we have it in a different strategy. Do you guys have a preference? And does that all make sense?
I saw some people come off mute online or turn their cameras on, so if you have comments, feel free.
I know it's like gonna be a little wonky, but this is just one of those
Wow.
things where there's not a great way to do it in committee.
Yeah.
Roy, did you have a thought?
I feel like going strategy by strategy might be best, like if you throw out all of the information of the whole thing.
It's just too much.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think strategy by strategy guides the conversation a
Okay.
little better.
I like that. Oh, maybe we should grab sandwiches now, stop for lunch, but let's try to do, it's 11:54. If we could try to be back in our seats at noon and eat and talk, because I think we'll need the whole hour to get through it all.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Sounds good.
online
5
people
minutes.
will be back in 5 minutes at noon. Okay, and then, okay, we're back. Everyone online. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Perfect. Anyone who was in the workshops where we talked about these, feel free to also chime in with any like additional context or thoughts. Okay, so the first strategy, is sort of the big complicated one, which is provide 100% electricity supply to the community. And also the red, any text in red is like a new strategy or a substantially changed strategy. The black ones I'll still read aloud, but those are existing strategies that didn't change at all or changed very little. We definitely took a different approach to this one because the context has changed a lot since we initially created that strategy. So with the main important context being that our investor-owned utilities are regulated to provide 100% renewable electricity by 2040 now. So action one was ensure compliance with the clean energy targets established for investor-owned utilities in House Bill 2021 by following utilities progress and advocating as opportunities occur if progress is not on track. And then strategy B, is to engage with Central Electric Cooperative to better understand their resource planning and identify opportunities to encourage clean energy supply. So those two strategies kind of cover the whole electricity grid supply, with a big focus on, we talked a lot about how we're sort of counting on the utilities complying with House Bill 2021, and that being something that we need to make sure that we're following and sort of participating in. Any thoughts or questions or feedback on that one?
I have a question for Rory on that one. I know you had shared with the committee some questions about compliance and just kind of how you would see the right role for the city to be able to. This is an attempt of trying to nod towards that instead of just blindly following, but.
Yeah, so what you're referencing there, Neil, is there's proceedings at the Public Utilities Commission where the utilities have to like show their progress towards meeting this House Bill 2021. And from what I have seen and read, Pacific Power is not on track to meet that goal. And they've gotten apparently more like behind schedule in their most recent resource planning. So, you know, I think to your question, Neil, like City Bend is a city that has its own adopted renewable energy targets. And like Cassie said, like in some ways with House Bill 2021, we're relying on those utilities to do the work they're mandated to do by the state to help us achieve our local goals. There's a role for the city to get involved in some of those proceedings when Pacific Power is doing its resource planning and say, hey, it's not just the state, we have adopted local policy and, you know, goals. Like we need you to do the work local, you know, for our own local sake as well, in addition to what the state's doing. So, you know, it takes a village, right, to achieve those kinds of policies. So the City of Bend, I think, could be an influential voice in some of those proceedings that I think largely happen at the PUC at this point.
Do you think this language is broad enough to, that was, I think, some of how it was written with that goal?
No, I liked that last phrase, advocating as opportunities occur if progress is not on track. So yeah, it'd be great for this committee or the city, you know, whoever to pen a letter or a minute of testimony, and when opportunities arise to, you know, push the utilities to do that. Great. Yeah.
Perfect. Any other thoughts or questions on this one? Perfect. The second one is a strategy, which actually I feel like is a new strategy, so it should be red. Reduce emissions associated with reliance on and usage of natural gas. So this was sort of a placeholder for the work we're doing in the electrification policy options analysis, because the goal of that project is to identify policies and different initiatives to encourage people to you know, electrify homes and other buildings in town. And so this strategy was meant to say whatever comes out of that process to put in here. So we don't have actions to discuss right now. It sort of comes up again in the energy in buildings, 1, 2, and we actually got sort of more specific in that one, so we'll discuss it more, but any thoughts on that as a strategy and just having that placeholder? And depending on what those are, like if they end up fitting, we'll have to sort of figure out where each of them fit, but we wanted to just make sure in the discussion, like acknowledging that that's a big part of the energy supply work. Okay, the next one is ES3 is encourage solar and other renewable energy generation on residential and commercial buildings. This is the one that has like a lot of sub actions under it. So most of them are existing. We have increased community education about renewable energy and available incentives. Develop and deliver outreach and education targeted at basically the building industry. So that's kind of newly split up as community education versus more targeting at industry outreach and education. The ES3C is support and expand local workforce development programs in renewable energy trades. That's an existing action. ES3D is a new one. That is develop programs that leverage and complement existing programs that encourage residents and businesses to pursue renewable energy and energy storage projects. So this is meant to be also sort of a broad catch-all strategy that commits the city to doing actual like programming, like more than just outreach and education, but actually building out programs to help encourage people to install more renewable energy in their homes and businesses. And that can look a lot of different ways. ES3E is create new financing options and other financial and non-financial incentives to expand renewable energy projects. That's just sort of a twist on an existing one. And then the last one was specifically calling out exploring permitting processes for opportunities to incentivize renewable energy and energy storage projects. So are there any questions or feedback or comments on those, either by the people who were at this one, which I think Neil is the only one present, or by others that want to add something?
Well, Rory's thinking, in that last action, I think that this is a scope change, not just a wordsmithing, but when you're looking at permitting processes for opportunities, it also can be recognizing barriers. So like both of those things have an impact in the permitting process on having the end impact of incentivizing renewable energy. So I don't know if we can have that scope be broad enough to include removing barriers or making it easier.
I mean, to me, that would be included in this language. Are you saying you just want it to be called out so that, like, if we're exploring permitting processes, my thought is we would like look at our permitting processes and looking at what are the challenges here.
Okay, yeah,
That's what it means to me.
great. I just want to make sure that was what it meant and that it wasn't just like in the past, I think the language was so specific of like, look at the permitting process for opportunities to engage in education with builders or, you know, something
That was
like
a different strategy,
Right.
yeah.
And so I'm just making sure that I'm reading this to be broad enough to include that piece, which you said it was, which is great.
The one that you're referring to is actually ES3B. And so because it had been like, do community education was the first one. And then the second one was like, use the permitting process to do education at builders. And we changed it because there's actually other ways to engage with builders and developers and contractors. So that's how that one changed. And then this was, in ICES3F, the permitting processes, in my mind, is sort of a sub of a non-financial incentive.
Yeah.
So we called it out separately, just knowing that there is a lot in the, you know, just to give it some additional attention. But it is what, in my mind, it was what you said.
Great.
I just had a quick comment, and this doesn't have to be discussed right now, but I just learned recently, I was talking to a business and I realized they shared that they were interested in doing solar panels, but they leased their building. And as a result, they can't do it because they have to go through the building owner. And I wonder how common that is. And I wonder if that would be addressed through one of those actions when that group is looking into it. I just wanted to note that if that's something that's really prevalent, especially on the business side, that could have a pretty big impact if there's a way to make that easier to do.
Yeah, I think the develop programs, this new ES3D is sort of meant, because I see like something like that. It depends on what our solution is for it, but if it was some sort of, the developed programs is meant to be sort of broad, so that like, if it's any body of work that the city is gonna commit to doing, that's a combination of, you know, having to do outreach and education, but then actually some sort of intervention, that's not like a direct incentive. Can kind of fall under those programs. So I think my initial reaction is it would maybe be a program you could develop around property owners. You know, you'd have to look at that really specifically and figure out what the different things are. And truthfully, a lot of programs are a combination of outreach and education and incentives that then you like kind of put together. So this developed programs one is meant to just be a placeholder that we are going to be willing to do like a whole comprehensive program like that, where we're sort of like taking a problem, finding a solution, and then implementing the solution. But in reality, the solution is probably going to involve some of these other actions as subsets of it.
I like that. And that just brought to mind that other situation with homeowners that have HOAs being sometimes limited in what they can do if it doesn't meet the exact criteria.
Yeah.
I wonder if that can also look at it.
Yeah, and I think HOAs is sort of like its own kind of sticky topics that legal could probably fill us in on some background on, but
We've had some conversations.
yeah.
With ES3D, the new one that we just talked about, my first read of it, I was like, what does this mean? Because, and mostly just the first half of it, develop programs that leverage and complement existing programs that encourage residents to pursue. So hearing that conversation of the intent of it helped, but is there any way to be more specific? Like what kinds of programs, like what? Yeah. I don't know.
Well, so we have a similar one in, you know, in energy supply and energy in buildings, we have a lot of like the same actions twice. And we did, oh, I passed right by it. In energy and buildings, we called out specifically like an energy navigator program. So that's where you have sort of a tool that connects people to incentives and things like that. So that was sort of one of the programs that we talked about really specifically. Laura and Lauren were the ones that really shaped this one. And so I wish they were here because they had a lot more ideas. And Neil, I don't know if you can remember like other examples. I think it would be simpler to just cut out this part.
Yeah.
Because that's something that we would do.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I like that.
But they were just wanting to say, and I think that was sort of a nod to like, there's IRA programs out there. So if there's like new IRA programs coming from the state, we should build a program that kind of surrounds that program so that we can make sure our community members are accessing Odo's program by providing additional outreach and support and that sort of thing. So it was sort of a nod to like that. And then same thing with all of the, what's the other, the one that Laura talks about a lot, like all those new financing. There's like a new legislation that like Solar for All is under it, and then all of like the community finance, the new financing options, basically. I'm so mad I can't remember the word for it. There's a couple of federal programs basically that are getting trickled down through the states that then we had discussion around wanting to make sure we're getting the resources from those federal programs into our community members' hands, but needing to do some programming around that. So to me, it would be cleaner to just cut this out because I know that we will do that and I trust we will do that. So if you guys would be comfortable with that.
I guess I know we probably need to move on, but I think just as a general note, I think this clarifies the catch-all for program opportunities, but I think maybe as general feedback, making sure that we're taking advantage of and Central Oregonians are taking advantage of other incentive and outside opportunities is something that I've heard brought up a lot.
Yeah.
And a specific nod might be worth its own category or language like maneuvering for you. Because I think that that's something that would get referenced a lot in conversations with opportunities as they come up.
It could be something like including not using this word, but taking advantage of federal and state programs, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So it's at the end. So it's like the sentence is like develop programs that encourage residents and businesses to pursue renewable energy, including making sure we're leveraging.
Yeah.
I like that better, but I also don't want to push too hard to change it without Laura and Lauren here, if they were the ones who came up with that version.
I can circle back with them and make sure it doesn't change the intent too much.
And just a quick point of clarification, are we voting it on all of these at the end of today, or?
We're not
It's
going to
not-
be able to just because we're not trying to wordsmith here. I just was anticipating it would be too hard to do
That
that.
makes sense.
And like I said, and also because we're gonna change this, the actual language will change as we go through the rest of our process, especially with the feedback. So I don't think we need to vote on it until we're like, this is our CCAP list, which will happen more in like December probably.
Sounds good.
We just want to get enough assurance that we're comfortable moving forward with those other steps with this body of work.
One other quick question, we currently just have one energy working group, right?
For the workshops, we had two,
Okay.
one for buildings, one for energy supply.
Yeah.
We don't really have any we don't really
That's
have any
good.
other active groups other than the waste and materials is the only active working group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know at one point we only had combined them into just like the energy group, and I know you mentioned a lot of the actions are same on both sides. And this is just, I'm wondering if it would be possible to, as part of this update, to reorganize just the energy and buildings, the energy supply to under like an energy larger category, and then that still has supply in buildings, right? But then also like a overall like a common one, so you don't have to repeat the actions in both. If
Yeah.
that's happening a lot, I just wonder if that would make it clean.
It happens with a few, to me, the disadvantages of combining them outweigh the advantages.
Okay.
This category, this ES3 is sort of where it happens the most. It doesn't really happen in the other strategies. There's this one and there's like a similar one in buildings, which is just like encourage people to do more of these projects in their own spaces. But the other ones are all different enough.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Are we ready to move on? Does anyone have comments online on anything? Okay, great. The next category is pursue local renewable energy generation. So these are different actions about actually generating renewable energy, in Bend or within the region. The first one is investigate and pursue opportunities for renewable energy generation at the water reclamation facility, the water filtration facility, and other areas of the water distribution system, which is something that we do work on. We used to have one specifically about the water reclamation facility. So this is just broadening that since we are looking at those other ones anyway. The second one is support the development of community solar projects locally that residents can subscribe to for access to offsite renewable energy. The third one is pilot microgrid and battery storage projects powered by renewable energy that can operate independently of the energy grid. Those are both existing actions. And then the fourth one, which is new, is explore the potential for district energy projects or like thermal energy networks. And then the fifth one is participate in advocacy as opportunities arise to reduce regulatory barriers for local renewable energy development. Any thoughts or questions on that?
A couple thoughts on the first one, renewable energy generation at water facilities.
Mhm.
We've on the ECC's gotten presentations from the utilities department on this concept before. I think I've made a similar comment then, but so the city has this dual source water system, both groundwater and surface water from Tumalo Creek. It's great in many ways, but there's trade-offs too. There's costs of pulling, I think especially surface water from Tumalo Creek. Tumalo Creek will have reduced flows going into the surfer with climate change and reduced snowpack and all that. So, while the city will continue pulling water from Tumalo Creek, and if we're doing that, it makes sense in a lot of ways to generate some power, if there's an opportunity there. I would love to add into the end of this action, something about balancing the ecological needs of Tumalo Creek.
What are other people's thoughts on that?
Just real quick, I think that some of the I don't know if we were talking about necessarily a hydro related project in that case. Like there's waste, heat, recapture, and other things that come off of the water treatment process. And I think it's been a minute, but I think that's what we had in mind there, or at least that's what I was thinking about.
We were definitely talking about there's a
Reclamation.
big potential in conduit hydro project up there that has a really long history here. So that was definitely included in this, but also open for those other projects, Andrew, like you mentioned as well.
Okay, great.
Because I think, oh, sorry, because based on Rory's comment, isn't the circumstance that there's concern that you would see more flow put through the piping system than you would otherwise if you are trying to optimize for hydropower generation? And so I'm wondering, Rory, if there's also some caveat of using water that is being moved, somehow that it's only water that is already going to be transported for supply purposes, as opposed to any hydro explicit, and then losing that in-stream flow that it would have had otherwise.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, that's already in the early feasibility study and whatnot that the city's looked into. My comment, I guess, more is kind of the bigger picture of how the city balances its pull from surface and groundwater. And even if we're only running a hydroelectric generation facility based on only the water that the city would otherwise take without it to serve municipal needs, just the, I guess, long-term impacts of maintaining that same reliance on Tumalo Creek as natural flows in Tumalo Creek shrink, and impacts on the fisheries, red band and historic bull trout and all that. There's just impacts, there's a lot of benefits, there's costs too. And this is our climate action plan, but we're also the environment and climate committee. So I'm calling I'm suggesting a fairly simple call out of recognizing or balancing ecological needs of Tumalo Creek.
I think the key, I'm sorry to chime in, but I think the key piece there is that in the feasibility study, the city isn't and would not contemplate taking more water out of the creek than it would otherwise be using for its domestic water supply needs. So I want, if that is something that the committee wants to include in the plan, I'm just not sure that that is properly categorized, because that's not going to have an effect at all on the energy generation. The energy generation would just be the water that we're taking. I think that would be something else. And I don't know, I'm trying to look at the categories as we look at them. That would be almost changing the amount of water we're taking for other needs. And I don't know if that's what the committee is talking about, because the energy generation is just existing water use.
Yeah, no, I recognize that
So-
again, that's.
So I just want to be careful where we categorize it, because I want to be clear in this document, as we have in other city documents, that if we do the in conduit hydro, it wouldn't involve additional water use.
Yep.
So is there another category, Cassie, where the committee would like to look at what the water use is, recognizing that it's capped by code? And I mean, this is just we're opening like a whole nother, and I don't want to put into energy production something that really is unrelated to energy production, because we're not going to change the amount of water that we're using for energy reasons.
Is it an energy consumption issue though as well, though, if we're thinking about sort of energy consumption by the city to use groundwater as a substitute to avoid in-stream flow withdrawals? So Roy, I'm assuming some of what you're insinuating is this issue of, right now, I think generally the city tries to maximize in-stream flow use because of the quality and the conveyance and the head pressure and the avoidance of pumping costs and energy costs. But there is this opportunity when you're not at full maximum demand that you would choose on the margin between more pumping versus more in-stream withdrawals. And if the city is actively increasing its likelihood to choose the surface water because there's energy generation, which even, it increases the potential net energy, and depending on what the grid composition looks like, the impact the city is having on energy consumption. I know that trade-off comes up frequently for the water supply. And Rory, I appreciate though the point that it might be more nuanced than a specific action needs to have in at least the action language.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, that's why I started with there's costs and benefits. There's a lot of benefits to the dual source and getting some hydroelectric renewable energy generation from part of it. But there's also a cost. So that's all I'm calling out is notwithstanding all the benefits that have been talked about, there is a cost.
I know we have to move on, but I kind of feel like you're hinting at a broader conversation about the city prioritizing and including different things in the balance of how it's choosing between surface and other flows. And this would be part of that consideration. And I almost feel like that would be in the category if we were talking about resiliency, and like resiliency in a climate context is related to all of those things, both in terms of the resilience of our water system, but then also resiliency in the face of climate change on its impact on our streams and water and stuff like that. I think impact wise here, seeing that there's already a nod to this in the feasibility study, the impact of bringing these things up also has the impact of us not having this for the 9 years that the system's been in place because of pushback, ambiguous pushback back then, that has had a significant impact on the city and its energy use. And personally, my personal opinion, like wasted resources building pressure reducing systems that could have been hydroelectric systems. So 9 years of wasted hydro resource while we're figuring out resilience thing also has a significant impact too, that is big.
I think it's a good point, and I think it's a point that the committee might want to continue or consider. I just want to make sure it's properly categorized, because that complicated calculation that's used, all of the ecological factors, energy use factor, all of the factors. I think it's a good thing to be thinking about, but I wonder if in resilience or in another category is a better fit if we're going to add it. So it doesn't. My worry is that could be misinterpreted as it just being an energy production issue, but it's so much broader. So if we want to keep it, could we consider putting it in a different category?
And we don't have a water category or a resilient, we chose not to do like a resiliency and adaptation
Right.
category.
Okay.
I think the challenge, Rory, I feel like I understand you're just like asking for just like a little bit, like, just remember, we want to think about the trade-offs. I don't see that as being problematic or substantially changing this
Right.
action, other than the like what just happened here. Like it's hard to bring it up without it becomes a little bit of a distraction, I think, from but I'm open either way. I'm having a hard time gauging where the committee is sitting on whether we want to include this or not. And then one of the staff feedback steps we're going to do is having legal review all the strategies. And I have no doubt that this type of thing would maybe come up in their review. So I guess right now, maybe just like a hand raise from the committee about if you'd like to propose including this, keeping it, because I think the way that you've brought it up, it's like, it doesn't change what we're doing
No.
because of what Michael said.
Yeah.
And just wanting to make sure that we're acknowledging that. So I think that could be okay. It's probably something we'd want to talk about with the legal department more to just figure out that, but we could talk about that later. So can I get a raise of hands from the committee if you'd like to propose including a little clause like this versus not? Covey, do you have a
I had
question
a quick
before?
question before that. Just want to make sure, so I don't understand this issue as well, but does that impact all of what that action is mentioning? So
It's mainly the water filtration facility.
yeah, and I wonder if that,
It's mainly one specific project at the water filtration facility.
yeah, and I wonder if that would be the best way to include that there then, because it's talking about the system as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And all three of those different parts, versus that's only impacting one part of it. So I wonder if we could, well, we can vote on this first and see how.
Just a hand raise,
Yeah,
not like a
that's-
formal,
that's
I don't,
where
this
it's
doesn't need to be like a formal vote, but I think to Covey's point and sort of Michael's point, like there's with respect to that project, there's many other sort of like checks in place where that discussion will come up. And so if it like convolutes this action to a point where it's confusing or makes it more challenging in certain ways, it may not make sense to include it here, because we can be assured that there's like other places where that conversation will be central. And then if we were to do an adaptation resiliency focus plan in the future, we could dive really deep into water. and water conservation and stuff.
And I was just gonna say one other way to just keep it broad, but still consider that is, say, investigate and pursue ecologically considerate opportunities, or just add like a word or two that's more broad, but still like points to that. I don't know if that would be something you'd be okay with or not.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I like the Tumalo Creek call out because it's specific and,
Okay.
but, that would also be fine.
Kelly also had her hand raised.
Kelly?
I was raising it for the voting, or not voting, but process. So I kept pulling it down. I was jumping the gun a little bit there.
Okay, so I just want to hand raise if we think we should include a clause about Tumalo Creek. Hand raise if you agree with that. We have Kelly, Mark, Rory. And that's 3.
3 and 3.
Well, I think we have more.
We
And
have
then
more than-
a hand raise if you think we should not include that and just leave it as is, knowing that we have other protections, for lack of a better word, for that topic or could be discussed. So hand raise for not. So we have Serena, Neil, Kavi, did you vote?
Hello.
Andrew and Kavi. Okay, so we have 4.
No, enough about
So we'll
this.
keep it out.
I don't know, and honestly, I'm a little bit I'm unsure of where the right place to do it, but I appreciate the intention of trying to identify that we are sensitive to any potential unintended ecological consequences of actions, and maybe explicitly in a strategy description, it's not necessary, but if there's someplace else in the updated CCAP, we can make those points too.
What about the ecologically considerate? Because I sort of like that. It also applies to other, we could think about if there's like a different phrase that works better than that, but it applies to other types of projects. Like people have environmental concerns about all sorts of renewable energy projects, so it could conceivably come up in other ways for sure. Can we do a hand raise if people are interested in some sort of something related to ecologically considerate, whether it's this or something similar? So a hand raise if you support sort of a nod to that, or want to just like keep it out and keep it really energy focused. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
I guess it's still my point. It does feel like you're right that it's almost a general consideration we want the committee to acknowledge that we're sensitive to, and the public should be sensitive to, and the city should be sensitive to. That probably covers almost all of the actions or all of the strategies to some dimension, or several, especially on the energy side. So I guess that would be my only concern, then, is if there's a better way to address that in a
Like in the strategy level almost, because this whole strategy is about local energy development. Because it's sort of true, like if you want to think about it here, we'd also want to think about it for district energy projects and other things.
I know that's the thing that I'm struggling with is like, I also have caveats that I would love to put on things of like,
Yeah.
I'd love to do this thing, but I think that there should be very specific guardrails placed around what's considered renewable natural gas and the definition of this. And I just struggle with, I think it's going to be really hard to write these goals if we include all of those things. And so I'm struggling big picture wise,
Okay.
having those pieces. Cause I do think that there's like, if the goal was maximize the renewable energy potential and decrease the amount of ground pumping that we do by focusing everything on the hydro plant, like that goal would be something that we should be having a very strong debate of whether it's included or not. But I think all of the like, I just want to make sure that there's a caveat that this doesn't go the wrong way. I'm just struggling not having every single action have a caveat that I'd also like to include. That's
Okay.
me personally.
I propose, since as discussed, we do have time to still sort of wordsmith these, so we don't actually have to come to a consensus on this in this moment. So I'm just gonna propose that we move on. Like, because again, this is for like the modeling, like that clause is not going to change the modeling. And even for the community survey, it'll be interesting to see if it comes up in the community survey. I think that's one thing we could look out for. Like if lots of people's comments on the energy supply are like, have concerns about that particular one or other renewable energy projects, then we can talk about, wanting to make sure to factor it in. Okay, are there other questions or comments or feedback on the because we are not gonna get through everything.
I know.
Thank you for the discussion.
Um,
Could we just do the new actions and speed it up that way?
are you guys comfortable with that? Focusing on the new actions?
Mhm.
I think that's probably a good idea. And let us just keep in our minds that again, we're not finalizing. We don't need to do all the wordsmithing. What we really need to get through today is like, is this body of work generally what we want to move forward with, that we're comfortable starting the GHG evaluation process? So I might, moving forward, just have to cut off certain comments if
Yeah.
they're not going to help us towards that goal. And then, yeah, we can talk about how to raise them. So we're moving on to energy and buildings. The first strategy is support policies that reduce greenhouse gas. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
No.
I had a question of ES4D, explore the potential for district energy projects.
Uh-huh.
What's a district energy project?
Do you want to explain it, Neil?
Sure. It's where you would have combined, usually like a thermal system that would heat multiple buildings at the same time. So as the city's exploring growth areas or something like that, that is often chosen. It's usually used in like campuses or larger redevelopment sites.
I think especially if I think about like the public giving us feedback on these, we need a little more in this action to explain
Description
what
of what that is.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Like
good
what
feedback.
district, you know, yeah.
And actually, since we're doing the strategy level, I don't think that they're not going to see the actions in this, in the
Okay.
survey unless, well, at least in the draft we have working now. If we do include the actions, we're just, since I was on a trip, so I'm just sort of wrapping my head around it. If we do include the actions, then I think that's a really good point. We'll make sure to define that and other things that'll be confusing. And then was there any comments on the last one, ES4E? Because that's also new. Okay. So moving on to energy and buildings, the first strategy is support policies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in buildings. The new ones are support state legislation that align with CCAP goals and actions and support local implementation of statewide laws and programs. So that's sort of just a catch-all for, you know, participating in the state legislative process on buildings topics. Develop policies to limit fossil fuel use in new construction, which again is sort of dependent on our electrification policy options project, but I feel comfortable including that as now because this one and the next one, which is develop policies to phase out gas appliances and replace with electric, was sort of the goal of pursuing that electrification project in general. So the specific policies aren't called out here. Those will be determined by that project, but this is just kind of a nod to those. So does anyone have questions or comments on those three new actions? Okay. The next one is encourage upgrades in residential and commercial buildings that promote energy efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this is the one that has a lot of kind of comparable strategies in energy supply. So we've talked about most of these. There's the develop programs that encourage residents and businesses to pursue energy efficiency, electrification, and other emission reduction upgrades, such as an energy navigator program. We'll take that same feedback from the last one about just switching the clause here about the complementing existing program, since it just makes it confusing. Identify barriers and create financing options and other financial and non-financial incentives to expand energy efficiency and electrification. Explore permitting processes for opportunities to incentivize high performance building and promote low carbon building technologies. So those are similar to the ones in energy supply. And then the last one, which is unique to this, is promoting energy efficiency and load management through smart controls and demand response participation. Are there any questions, comments, or feedback on those?
I'll follow up later. I want to respect other goals.
I know, and we have a lot of new ones in transportation, so we want to make sure to have time for that. And waste materials. Implement benchmarking and disclosure programs for energy performance. So the new one is to implement statewide building performance standards that require certain buildings to track and report energy use and explore creating a city-specific expanded program. So this one was referencing, there is a new statewide program that's in rulemaking right now about a commercial building performance standard that allows cities to also create city-specific programs. Potentially, there's a lot to be figured out in that. So this was just saying that we would, adopt and pursue that program here and consider exploring an expanded program if that's allowable. That's a new one. And are there any questions or comments or feedback on that?
I think that'll evolve, as we see the state program come more into
Sure.
reality.
Okay, great. This was much quicker. That's great. That's what we need right now. Okay, so then we'll move on to transportation.
Can I mention that last one?
Mhm.
It's the first half of that is a past state bill that they would do that. That's in rulemaking.
EB3A.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So like that specifically is what is being
Yeah,
asked. And then the second thing is the action that the city could actually do. Because the first thing
it's happening.
is happening.
Yeah,
So I guess I'm not seeing that level of specificity for other spaces. And so like exploring expanded programs in reference to that. I just don't know if it makes sense to call that out as a goal. Or if there's something more specific that we want to call out as a goal there beyond just like implementing it. If it's using that information to try to explore citywide opportunities, including an expanded program or something that's like using that data to move forward. This is like something that wouldn't be an immediate goal. But just doing it is not really in our hands and is already kind of happening.
so you're saying like cut out like this first part because it's not like a city action?
Or have something, the second thing is the thing that's the city action.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if I have a specific recommendation. I'm just recognizing that first half is not in our control and already happening.
are you in favor of eliminating that part then?
I mean, I think the one option is to say, based on how that rolls out, develop a even more stringent program locally. It's always an option.
Right.
Which is that second half, yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it just needs to explain, maybe that first piece is really explaining what the bottom half is in reference to.
Yeah.
So the language just needs to be more in reference to the state program rather than the action step of implementing it.
Okay, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just switch the phrasing, say, create a city-specific expanded program that goes beyond implementing the
Yeah.
statewide building performance standards.
Yeah.
I think that works.
General feedback.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to transportation. I'm just trying to think because we're not gonna get through, even with the actions, we're not gonna get through everything. So I just have to figure out how we approach that. Anyway, let's talk about transportation. So the first one is a strategy about encouraging community-wide electric vehicle adoption. This one's considered new because the last one was about creating an EV readiness plan, and this actually takes the strategies in the EV readiness plan and makes them CCAP strategies. So it's expanding access to community-wide public charging, expanding access to charging for people who live in multifamily developments, expanding workforce charging, and conducting outreach and education about electric vehicles. Any questions or comments on that one? It's pretty straightforward. The next one under encourage bike and pedestrian travel. The new ones are prioritize TSP projects and programs that develop safe alternative transportation routes to schools, improve safety based on crash analysis data by implementing projects and programs in the transportation safety action plan, such as education, physical project improvements, and a crash review board. And then the last one is expand bicycle parking, including mobility points and bike parking at key destinations. And for the transportation group, this language was worked through with our transportation and mobility and also our long range planning department, helped me take the discussion points we had and put them into like the actionable pieces. So that's why
Yeah.
that looks different than you saw them last. Other questions or comments on that one? Okay. Within increased transit ridership, the new actions we have are collaborate actively with Cascades East Transit to promote transit use, such as by providing new infrastructure to support transit stops, promoting transit use through city channels, and aligning city planning and CET planning. And then the last one is supporting the use of transit to recreational destinations, including to the ski resort. Any questions or comments on those? Or feedback? It's still fine to share some feedback. You don't have to.
I'm really liking, like seeing the difference between this language and the previous CCAP and how much this language reflects all the early meetings that we had with folks of like, this is our goal. And like, well, really, this is what would be helpful. It's really helpful seeing this in language. I think it's going to be a lot more actionable.
Yeah, I agree.
I had a quick big picture question on that, but I can hold off until.
Let's try to get through them all and then Neil, I'll talk with the chair and the vice chair in our debrief meeting about like how and when we want to like have all of these further discussions.
Okay, yeah.
Promoting the use of carpooling and van pooling. There are 2 new actions under that. We did encourage carpooling to city and community events, and then partnering with large employers to promote carpooling and van pooling for daily commute. So that one's sort of split into like general community events and then commuting specifically. Does that, any questions, comments, or feedback? Okay. The next one in transportation, I think we're gonna be able to get through them all with this model. The next transportation one is.
You're doing great, Kat.
Yeah. Use land use policy and transportation planning to encourage VMT reduction. So this is a new strategy that's sort of bringing in more explicitly land use and the connection of land use to transportation, and especially with CFEC being newly enacted, there's just a lot of really good close connections there. So the 3 new actions include make land use changes to promote walking, biking, and transit use by implementing policies from the comprehensive plan, the transportation system plan, and refinement area plans to build complete communities. So that's sort of like a catch-all, like use land use to encourage that. That was, I know, Rory, that was one that you had proposed, and that was how the language landed after talking through with the departments. The next one is when the city designates climate-friendly areas, identify and pursue additional opportunities to increase housing and multimodal options for transportation and connectivity. And the last one is when amending the transportation system plan, do not prioritize projects that increase VMT. So Rory, that was the one that was like amend the transportation system plan, and we thought we could commit to when we amend it next, that we would not prioritize projects that increase VMT. So are there questions, comments, or feedback on those? And I know the transportation group, it's a little different than how we left it, so I am curious if you guys feel like we lost anything in the changes.
I do have a couple comments. On the first one, land use changes by implementing the plan documents. To me, there's a chicken or the egg issue here. I think how originally proposed, it was more along the lines of when we're developing policies in these planning documents, make sure that they include land use changes that promote walking, biking, and transit. And this sort of, I think, flips that a little. It's saying implement whatever the policies are in those plans. So I think, you know, the vision I had for this one was basically insert climate issues or a goal for greenhouse gas reduction strategies in future long range planning, right? When we're doing land use planning, let's have a policy in the CCAP that says when we're doing long range planning, let's promote walking, biking, and transit. And this sort of flips that.
That makes sense to me, and I
Yeah.
think the switch was that I think from our planners' perspective is they feel, especially with Oregon laws and especially with CFAC, they feel like that's sort of baked in like
Yeah.
to it automatically, but I think for that reason, switching it to the language you recommend, I don't see there being any heartburn over that because it's generally what we're doing
Right.
anyway.
I like both. Like they're two separate things, right? Using the plans and the plan recreation are two separate steps that either if there's language that can address both of them, great, but if not, I think it's fine having them be two separate actions. Since it's not something that's like,
It's like make the plan and then implement the plan.
yeah, and over
plan in
this
this way and
time
then
frame is
implement it.
long enough that we're both implementing plans and then we'll go through plan revision over time.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you have a comment, Michael?
Do you like, I think it's a good comment, Rory, and I think it's an important one. And I'm partial to the when amending or when updating language in the third. And I wonder if that would work in T6A also. So at the next amendment or update to the comp plan, TSP and refinement area plans, that's when we would do the things you're talking about.
I see.
So I was gonna propose that, but wanted to see if that was what you were getting at. Not that we
Yeah.
would go and update them now, but at the next update or amendment, depending on how we did it.
Yeah.
Okay,
That makes
yeah,
sense.
I like that way of doing it too, not losing sight of what's there, but it's
Right.
both. And we are to a large extent legally obligated to implement those plans anyway, so the goal would be
Yeah.
to do the thing we are obligated to do.
Mm-hmm.
Which is always a good goal, but, I think it's keeping those in mind when we amend or update the plans, that's the important piece.
Other comments or questions on the other ones in T6?
I do have another comment. So T6B, the designating climate friendly areas, we had really good conversation about this at the transportation meeting. My idea was much like in the previous energy and buildings where we talked about the city should go beyond what the state code might say. I wanted one that was similar here. So the climate friendly equitable communities rules say a city has to designate 30% of its future housing growth to occur in climate friendly areas. My idea was let's go beyond that. Like, we're serious about climate action. Let's have more than 30% of our future growth with the opportunity to live in a mixed use walkable neighborhood that's more climate friendly than the other 70% of our future growth.
Yeah.
I would love to see that language back in personally, going above and beyond the 30% that
And I
CFAC
think-
calls for.
When we had the discussion, we talked about that, but we also talked about, it kind of like expanded a little bit beyond just that. And since I wasn't a part of the climate friendly areas study, I wasn't as familiar with all them, but do you remember that there were like these other, we were talking about expanding even the benefits. It's like you have the climate friendly areas, but then you can also sort of expand the benefits to the surrounding neighborhoods. And so
Yeah.
this was sort of meant to catch all of that without being like too committing on any one thing. So I think with this, like, pursue additional opportunities to increase housing in them, sort of like was meant to include that, like, it gives us the opportunity through this strategy to say we want to go above and beyond the CFA housing requirement, but it also was like attempting to capture the other things.
Yeah.
So we could add it as its own strategy in addition to this one, if like you really want to make sure that that's, because obviously the way it's written now, also we could not do that, like it's broad enough that if you felt it was important enough that that's the recommendation, we could add that separately. Those will be one of the things that when we get staff feedback, like we are going to be getting, I think what we want, anyway, we'll talk about that later, but when we get the staff feedback, we'll have to have some conversations about some of the ones. If there is not alignment between the committee and staff, we'll have to talk about how we, and I don't know on that one specifically, but since it's so specific, I could see that raising more like questions.
I think it would be valuable, since Rory's brought it up, to have that, like, I don't think it's gonna change the modeling
I don't
for
think it
this
will
goal,
either.
but I
Yeah.
think it would be great in the staff and council feedback to say, hey, this is an idea that's being pitched.
Yeah.
Of committing to a larger goal. We'd love to have the conversation with staff feedback and council feedback, because realistically, everyone would need to be into it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's a
but
good
that makes
flag.
sense.
Like, I think when we do go to council, it will be really good if there are like some of the big picture things
Yeah.
where we want council feedback, like committee is proposing this. It's gonna be a challenge, or it's gonna be different than we may do things. Like, is there council support for that or council discussion on that? So
does that work, Rory?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
that makes sense.
great. And I think that the language up above, though, is also nodding towards something that could be included in this or could be separate of the conversations that we were having of having the CFA and then having kind of like a city defined, not technically CFA,
Yeah.
but like transition, like trying to expand the benefits. So I think that language covers that in my mind, roughly.
And Rory, it's specifically about committing to greater percentage of housing in the CFAs than the 30%, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we only have 4 minutes. Again, since what we need to get to right now is just the evaluation, what we put forward for evaluation and what we put forward for the community survey. And if the community survey does not include the actions, it's really just the strategies, which we haven't been refining too much here. The actions do affect the evaluation. I'm wondering if we think that we can, for the rest of them, we can get feedback by email from individuals, and then I'm hoping I'll have enough information from that to be able to give a list to the consultant that I think will be generally agreeable. I feel like that's our only option other than extending the meeting, which I don't even know if we can do. Yeah,
I had,
we're adding another one.
if we finish transportation and waste materials is left, we do have a scheduled meeting on the 24th. Could we make that a public meeting and then invite folks who want to join from the committee to join that and just discuss waste materials as part of that? So we still have a chance to discuss that as a committee.
We could do that in terms of can we? I'm a little worried about if we wait until the end of September to get the strategies. Well, I guess if it's just one sector, it might be okay because they could start on the other ones. I just don't want to, if we postpone it too much, we're not going to hit the November deadline for getting the results. And same thing for like the community survey. And if few people, I'm curious how many committee members would actually additional would join, because if it's just the waste and materials group, like that group already talked about it.
Yeah.
So I feel like we'd be more likely to get more feedback from people over email than asking people to come to the extra meeting. Is
Can
my,
we initiate over email and then we can make available, we would be available, the Waste Materials Committee, if there were additional questions to be addressed? Not covered by email?
right, maybe that's a good idea. So we'll get feedback via email. And then if there are like some big picture things in the waste and material section that are like, okay, we really need the committee to discuss this because it's not clear, then we can adapt the waste and materials meeting group to cover that. Does that feel, Michael?
I'm
do
sure you,
have
all-
any
I mean,
legal
yeah,
concern?
and I know, I'm sure Mary says this every time anytime email comes up, but you just have to make sure you're emailing Cassie and just Cassie.
Yeah.
And not each other.
Yeah.
And then Cassie, if you compile the comments and see that there's a need to communicate back in a public meeting
Mhm,
and not in a group over email.
exactly.
Yeah.
The one, yes, there is one strategy that wasn't on here before. I'm just wondering, like, you
The
were trying to make
waste and
sure
materials.
not just actions or W7, just like making sure that at least that level, there's at least a minute for people to talk about it if we need to. That way, everything in
Yeah.
email is just action level.
Right now.
Yeah.
Okay, we also didn't talk
T7.
about the T7 though.
Oh, T7.
So
Mm,
T7
that's a
is-
good point.
Does
Yeah.
everyone have like 5 minutes to try to cover the 2 new strategies?
Yeah.
So these are, and this will be big picture, like, do you support this strategy or do you have reason to not support the strategy? So T7 is establish financial incentives to drive behavior change in transportation, including evaluating congestion pricing, identifying additional areas for paid parking districts, expanding the use of TDM programs for large employers, and continuing to explore a city gas tax as a funding tool. Does anyone have any feedback on the strategy about basically creating a new transportation strategy about financial incentives? Okay. And then the new waste and materials one is promoting low carbon food choices. So the two actions being prioritizing and promoting the offering of plant-based foods for city government meetings, events and meetings, and then conducting outreach campaigns that promote low carbon food choices.
Question, was W7A also supposed to be changed from plant-based foods to low carbon foods as well? Was it just, or was that intentional? I thought
We can change it to low carbon, because I know that was the discussion that came up in the other ones.
so.
Yeah, just to keep it consistent anyway. Does anyone have questions or concerns or feedback about low carbon food choices? Okay, so I will send an email out. I'll make the updates that we discussed today, and then I'll ask for any additional feedback you guys have on the waste and material section, but also since we did have to, excuse me, sort of rush through the earlier ones, you can provide additional comments through that. I'll talk with the chair and the vice chair about like when and how we want to hold space to like further discuss these things, because we don't want to, we want to make sure we're discussing them. Trying to still keep to our schedule. That sound good?
Yeah, and we're still gonna use the next waste materials meeting to have a chance to discuss the actions.
Only if it
Able to be resolved over email.
is needed. Well, mainly because the waste and materials group already discussed the actions, like the way they are now is as the waste and materials group approved them, so. But we can talk
Yeah.
offline, and if we want to do that, we can change it to a public meeting. And then my last slide is just reminding us for agenda review. At the next meeting, we're gonna have our big discussion starting about the electrification policy options. So like I said, we'll be sharing that report with you in advance. We expect that to be a topic with a lot of community interest. So just come ready to come prepared to discuss that topic. That'll be the whole focus for October with a presentation from the consultant, and then hopefully the November meeting will be split finalizing the recommendation about electrification, and then also getting the results from our GHG analysis and community survey. And then in December, that's when we're basically going to try to wrap up a bunch of things related to the CCAP in December. So I have here action refinements and finalizing, and then work planning and resource planning, but that will be a little bit more, that will take shape as we get closer to that. So a lot of really big stuff between now and the end of the year. Okay.
Great work,
And I
team.
had some big picture questions for this, but I can ask that offline, I guess.
Okay.
In advance of the next meeting.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.